This is my true story. My life was simple and full of hard work. I raised my daughter with all I had: time, love, and sacrifice. I never thought money would change her. Then she won $29 million in the lottery. That day, her eyes changed. That evening, she told me to leave her house. I stood in silence, my heart breaking. I walked away quietly, with nothing but my memories. 20 minutes later, I returned, and my choice changed everything. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. And please subscribe so my story reaches more people. I worked all my life to give my children a future I could not have. I grew up knowing hunger. My own father worked hard, and I promised myself I would work harder so my children would never know the emptiness of an empty table. I woke before dawn each day, my back bent under heavy burdens, my hands rough from years of toil, but my heart was full of hope for them. I labored in fields under the sun so hot it burned my skin, and in winters so cold it numbed my fingers. I carried sacks heavier than my body to earn wages that seemed too small for the weight I bore. I gave up comfort, I gave up sleep, and I gave up health. I worked through sickness, ignoring pain, because I wanted my children to have warmth, a bed, food, and opportunities. I sacrificed quiet moments of my own life so they could have theirs full of possibility. There were nights when I went to bed hungry so they could have their fill. There were days when I wore torn clothes so they could wear new ones. I built our home brick by brick with my own hands, using sweat and years of hard labor. Every nail, every stone, every beam was placed with my hands, but also with my love. I believed those walls would be my legacy, proof of my devotion. I thought they would see the cost of that love and carry it in their hearts forever. I thought respect was something that grew naturally when a father sacrificed so deeply for his child. I thought my daughter would always stand beside me, proud of her father, grateful for the life I gave her. But life teaches you lessons in ways you cannot prepare for. I thought love was unshakable, unchangeable. I thought no prize in the world could destroy it. I was wrong. When my daughter won $29 million, the world changed for her overnight. But I could never have imagined it would change her heart toward me so completely. Money came into her life like a wave sweeping away everything that stood before it. The pride she felt was quickly replaced by arrogance. The joy of her win turned into a prideful blindness, and that blindness turned her away from me. Her laughter became sharper, her words colder. She began making decisions that pushed me out of her world. Where once she would speak with warmth and gratitude, she now spoke with distance and formality. Where once there was love, there was now something I could not name. Pride, maybe, or something worse. And I, a father who had given everything, began to feel the slow sting of betrayal. I noticed the change, but I said nothing. I stayed quiet, hoping that time would bring her back to the truth. I reminded myself that she was young, overwhelmed by her sudden fortune, and maybe she did not yet see the cost of what she had chosen. I held on to hope that she would remember the years, the nights, the days I gave to build a life for her. But each day, I watched her turn further away. Her visits became less frequent. Her words became fewer and colder. The warmth in her eyes dimmed. I thought perhaps it was only a phase, but my heart told me otherwise. That warmth, once my comfort, was gone. I had given her my life. Every morning, every effort, every drop of sweat was a gift to her. And still, in her greatest moment of triumph, she chose to close her door to me. It came without warning, without a word of explanation. One morning, she told me simply, "This is my home now. You have to leave." She spoke as if I were a stranger, as if the years we shared meant nothing. My heart broke quietly. I packed my belongings with trembling hands. I took what little I could carry, leaving behind the home we built together. I left without shouting, without begging, because I knew no words could change her mind. I walked away carrying pain deeper than any wound. The world seemed colder, the air heavier. I sat alone on a park bench, looking back at the home where laughter once lived. I thought of every sacrifice I had made, every moment I gave without asking for reward. I thought of the years I had spent working so she could have dreams, and now those dreams had cost me my place in her life. I did not cry openly, but my heart wept in silence. I thought about the lessons I wanted to pass on to her. I thought about how I had lived my life not for myself, but for her. And yet, she had closed her heart to me. I realized then that my love could not force her to see the truth. My devotion could not make her value the years of a father's sacrifice. But I also knew that I could not let my pain turn into bitterness. I decided that my answer would not be anger, but action. I would not fight her with loud words or threats. I would show her quietly that her choice had a price. I would prove to her, without yelling, what respect really means. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. I had to fight quietly, with patience and dignity. I spoke to my lawyer, learning what rights I had in the shadow of her winnings. I discovered that the law could be a tool for truth. I prepared myself to move carefully, to act when the time was right. I did not seek revenge for selfish reasons. I wanted her to understand what she had lost. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choice, not through my anger, but through the reality she had created. That is why I chose silence at first. I let her enjoy her fortune for 20 minutes before I stepped in. I knew that when she felt her victory most, the truth would strike the hardest. And so I planned quietly, with the patience of years of sacrifice behind me. I knew that the lesson I carried was bigger than any lottery win. I knew that dignity was worth more than money. And I knew that the day would come when she would understand that the cost of forgetting love is far greater than any sum of gold. When my daughter won the lottery, it was as if the ground beneath her feet shifted completely. $29 million came into her life like a sudden storm, washing away the days she knew before. At first, I was happy for her. I thought her joy would be mine too. I thought her heart would remember the years I spent working for her future. But I could feel the change almost immediately. It started with her smile. It became different, brighter, but sharper, like a blade. The joy in her eyes was mixed with something I could not name, something unfamiliar. It was pride, yes, but also something more dangerous: distance. She began making decisions that no longer included me. Invitations for family dinners became fewer. Calls became rare. And when we did speak, the warmth in her voice was replaced with formality. I watched her grow more distant day by day. I stayed quiet, telling myself she was adjusting to her new life. I reminded myself that money can change people, and perhaps she needed time. But the change was not just in her actions, it was in her attitude. Where once she sought my advice, now she dismissed it. Where once she valued my presence, now she seemed to avoid it. I noticed her laughter. It sounded lighter, as though she was sharing jokes and joy with another world where I was not welcome. My presence became less a part of her life and more a shadow she tolerated. I could see it in her eyes when we spoke, a polite warmth that lacked depth. I tried to tell myself it was not yet the end, that she still loved me deep down. But deep down, I knew she was changing for good. The first real blow came quietly. One afternoon, she announced she was redecorating the house, not with my help, not with my input, but with strangers, designers who had no connection to our life. It hurt more than she knew. Every corner of that house carried memories of years we built together, and now she wanted to erase them, as if erasing me too. I said nothing then. I watched quietly. I thought silence was the better way to understand what was happening. Perhaps she needed to find herself in this new world, and perhaps I should let her. But I could not stop feeling the slow drip of betrayal. Every small act of exclusion was another brick removed from the foundation of our bond. Weeks passed. Her changes became louder in silence. She started hosting gatherings without informing me. She began buying expensive things without sharing them. She even began speaking in ways that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. It was a slow, quiet transformation, and I was powerless to stop it. She began ignoring my presence at the table. When I tried to speak, she would nod politely without looking at me. I was no longer her father in her eyes, I realized, but a part of her past she was choosing to leave behind. The warmth we once shared had been replaced by a polite distance. I felt my place in her life dissolving, piece by piece. I remember one night clearly. We were at dinner, and I tried to share a memory of her childhood. She listened briefly and then excused herself, saying she was tired. She did not see the pain in my eyes. She did not notice the silence she left behind. That was the moment I knew the change was no longer temporary. It was not just her distance, it was her pride. She began speaking as though the money gave her the right to decide everything, even the fate of our relationship. The daughter who once clung to me for comfort now spoke with a tone of superiority, as though my years of sacrifice were nothing compared to her wealth. I began to see her differently. I began to understand that money, while a blessing in one way, could corrupt what was most sacred. It was not just wealth she had gained. She had gained a belief that she no longer needed her father's guidance. She thought she had everything she wanted, but in her blindness, she did not see what she had lost. I could feel my heart breaking quietly, not because she had won the lottery, but because she had lost sight of the love that built her life. I wondered if she realized that money could buy everything except respect, and perhaps even love. My silence grew heavier as days passed. I stopped asking about her life. I stopped seeking her company. I withdrew quietly, watching the distance between us grow wider. I did not speak of it, because I knew words would not change her mind. The change was not in her ears, but in her heart. And that heart had moved away from me. Her actions became clearer to me when she began making decisions that excluded me entirely. She renovated the house without telling me. She arranged parties without inviting me. She made plans that had no place for my presence. It was not cruelty she showed openly, but a quiet disregard that spoke louder than any words. She had changed. The daughter I knew, who valued love over possessions, was replaced by someone who measured worth by wealth. She had become a stranger to me in her own home. And the strangest thing was that she did not seem to notice. I realized then that I had two choices: to fight for a place in her life or to accept the truth and prepare myself for what came next. I chose silence. I chose to watch quietly, for I knew that silence could speak louder than any argument. And 20 minutes after her fortune was declared, the world between us had shifted forever. The day she told me to leave was not marked by anger. There was no shouting, no dramatic words. It came quietly, almost like a shadow slipping in without notice. She said it calmly, as if stating a fact. "This is my home now," she said. Her voice was steady, without hesitation. "I want you to leave." Those words landed in my heart like a heavy stone. I could not believe what I heard. I sat there in silence, staring at her face. I tried to find the warmth I had known, the daughter who once ran to me in joy. But it was gone. She looked at me with a firmness I had never seen before. Her eyes carried no regret. There was no softness in them, no flicker of doubt. I knew then this was not an argument to be won. She told me it was her choice, that she had every right now, with her money, to decide who lived under her roof. Her words were polite, almost rehearsed, but the meaning was clear. My years, my sacrifices, my role in her life were no longer worth mentioning. Her fortune had changed everything. I did not argue. I did not beg. My voice felt small, useless against her certainty. I quietly began packing my few belongings. Each item I touched seemed heavier than the last. Every photograph, every shirt, every book was a piece of my life I was now leaving behind. The house we built together was no longer mine. It was hers. And she was telling me to step away without a glance back. I remember folding my jacket slowly, as though I was folding away my own memories. My hands trembled, but I kept my silence. I wanted her to see the pain without me giving her words to dismiss it. She watched me quietly, her expression unreadable. I did not know if she felt guilt or pride. I left without argument, carrying nothing but my pain. The door closed softly behind me, and with it went the sound of years of shared life. The house stood behind me, silent and still, as if aware of the moment's finality. Outside, the world felt colder than before. For $29 million, she had chosen to erase me. Walking away that day was harder than anything I had done before. I felt like a man leaving not just a home, but a lifetime of devotion. Every step I took away from that house was heavier than the last. I could hear the faint sound of her voice behind me, though she did not call me back. It was a voice full of decision, not of love. The neighbors watched quietly. Some offered looks of sympathy, others of shock. But no one spoke. I did not want their pity, nor did I want arguments. My heart was too tired for either. I simply walked away, carrying the memory of her words with me. Get out. This is my choice. As I walked, I thought about all the years I worked to build that home. I thought about the nights I went without so she could have more. I thought about the sacrifices that no longer mattered. And I thought about the strange power money had given her, the power to remove her own father without hesitation. That moment changed everything. The cruelty was not in the words themselves, but in the absence of warmth. It was the absence of a goodbye. She did not fight to keep me. She did not speak of our history. She simply told me to go, as if I were a stranger. I understood then that this was more than just her winning the lottery. This was her claiming a new life and choosing to leave me behind. And she did it quietly, without drama, without confrontation, but with complete certainty. I went to sit on a bench nearby, holding my jacket against the cold. I watched the house where my life had been. The windows reflected the light of the afternoon sun, but they gave no sign of warmth. My mind replayed the scene again and again. Her calmness was what hurt the most. If she had shouted, if she had argued, it would have meant she cared enough to fight. But this was not fighting. It was letting go without a thought for what she was leaving behind. I began to realize that her lottery win had changed more than her wealth. It had changed her heart. It had taken away the part of her that belonged to me. That part that once said, "You are my father, I need you." That part was gone, and in its place was something I could not name, something colder. That night, I walked under the street lamps, letting my steps carry me away. I thought about my daughter, about the woman she had become, and about the man I was left to be. I thought about revenge, about justice, about the right way to answer such betrayal. But mostly, I thought about silence, because I knew that my answer would not come with noise. My answer would come quietly, in a way she would never expect. I sat alone that evening on the edge of an old wooden bench, far from the house she had thrown me out of. My coat was worn, my hands stiff with cold, and my heart heavier than anything I had ever carried. The world seemed quieter after that cruel day. It was as if the noise of life had been dimmed, leaving behind only the sound of my own breath and the slow beating of my heart. I thought about every moment I had given to her, every sleepless night, every sacrifice that had shaped her life. I remembered when she was small, how her laughter filled the house, how she would run to me for comfort when storms frightened her. I remembered carrying her on my back after long days of work, feeling her little hands cling to me as we made our way home. Those moments now felt like distant echoes, lost in the cruel silence she had given me. I wondered if she even remembered them, or if the lottery had rewritten her memory. If she saw me now, would she see the father who built her world, or just an old man who had been a part of her past? The cold air bit at my skin as I stared at the ground, thinking about the house I had built for her. Every brick, every nail, every sunrise I endured was part of a life devoted to her happiness. And now that life was stripped away, my place there was gone. The reflection in the puddle before me showed not just an old face, but a story etched in wrinkles, a story of years spent in silence, work, and love that had never been returned. My mind wandered through those years, searching for where it had gone wrong. Was it pride that had taken her away from me, or something deeper, something in her heart that no money could ever fill? I thought about her fortune, about the way her eyes had changed that afternoon. They no longer held warmth for me. They carried distance, certainty, and pride. I could not decide which was worse, the loss of her love or the ease with which she let go of it. I began to understand that grief did not always come with tears. Sometimes grief was quiet. It was a hollow place inside, a stillness that filled your days. My grief was now silent. I did not shout. I did not cry aloud. I sat in the quiet, letting my thoughts speak for me. I reflected on my years of sacrifice. I remembered working through sickness so I could pay her school fees. I remembered skipping meals so she could have what she needed. I remembered sleeping in cold rooms so she could rest in warmth. Those acts had been my silent prayers for her future. I thought she would remember them. But now I wondered if she ever had. She had won her fortune, but in doing so, she had won the power to erase the past. My sacrifices were gone, replaced by dollars and numbers in a bank account. My love had been replaced by silence. The bench under me creaked as I shifted my weight, and the sound startled me into remembering one truth. She had spoken to me like a stranger, not with hate, but with a calm finality that left no room for argument. That was her cruelty, to end my presence without a fight, without a word of love or farewell. I thought about the word betrayal. It did not feel enough to name what she had done. Betrayal was too simple. Her act was more than betrayal. It was the removal of a father's place without even a goodbye. And silence was her chosen weapon. The ache in my chest grew as I realized the depth of her choice. She had chosen her fortune over our years together. She had chosen pride over gratitude. And she had chosen to erase me quietly, without confrontation. I thought about what I wanted now. I wanted her to understand the weight of her choice. I wanted her to feel the emptiness she had created. But I also knew she would not. She was lost in her own world now, a world of numbers and fortune, far away from the father who had built her home. So I decided I would answer her silence with my own. Not with anger, not with noise, but with stillness. My answer would not be words. It would be my absence, my quiet departure from her life. That would speak louder than any shouting match. The world around me seemed to agree. The air was still, and the night settled softly over the city. I closed my eyes for a moment and let memories wash over me. Memories of her childhood, of laughter in the kitchen, of rainy nights when I held her close. Those moments were mine to keep, and no fortune could take them away. I began to walk, letting my feet carry me away from the bench, away from the house, away from her choice. Each step was heavy, but steady. I did not look back. I knew there was nothing left there for me. The quiet became my companion. It was a strange kind of peace, born not from joy, but from acceptance. I would not fight for a place that was no longer mine. I would carry her memory quietly, without resentment. That was my answer to her cruelty. I thought about my own father as I walked, how he once told me that dignity comes not from holding on, but from knowing when to let go. I felt those words now deep in my bones. My dignity was intact, even if my heart was broken. My silence was not weakness, it was strength. I knew that my journey was not just away from her house, but toward a kind of freedom. The freedom to love without being needed. The freedom to live without the weight of unspoken words. That night, I lay on a park bench and watched the stars. They were quiet witnesses to my pain. I whispered a prayer for my daughter, not for my own sake, but for hers. That she might one day see what she had lost, that she might understand that some things money cannot buy, respect, gratitude, love. And as I lay there, wrapped in silence, I knew my answer had taken shape. My silence would be my witness. My absence would be my truth. She would have her fortune, but she would not have my surrender. That was my quiet reflection. That was my choice. The night I sat in silence, reflecting on her betrayal, I came to a quiet decision. I knew my heart would ache for her forever, but I also knew I could not live my life waiting for her apology or recognition. I could not stay in a house where my place had been erased. I could not keep breathing under a roof where my name had lost meaning. The decision was not sudden. It was born of years of thought, pain, and quiet endurance. It came from the deepest part of me, where love and dignity met. I decided I would step away, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. My departure would not be loud. It would not be dramatic. It would be a silent statement of self-respect. I understood the difference between leaving out of spite and leaving out of necessity. I wanted her to see that my leaving was not weakness, nor surrender, but an act of grace. I wanted her to understand that I was not defeated by her choice, but freed by my own. I thought about the house, the memories, and the years. I thought about the meals I had cooked for her, the late nights I had worked, the sacrifices I had made. Those things would remain inside me. They were not something she could take away, no matter how much she wished to erase them. The first step in my decision was to stop fighting for a place where I was no longer wanted. I would not plead, not argue, not beg. Silence would be my shield. Absence would be my answer. I knew she would notice, but I was no longer concerned with her noticing or not. My peace was in my own hands now. I began to plan quietly. There was no need for haste, no need for drama. I wanted my departure to be clean, respectful, and complete. I wanted to leave without burning bridges, because bridges might be needed one day. But I knew those bridges would only be built from my dignity, not her approval. The second part of my decision was to focus on myself. For years, I had poured everything into her life. Now, I would pour everything into mine. I would rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I would take the time to heal, to rebuild, to live quietly, without expectation. I thought about the quiet mornings I could spend in peace, without the weight of her choices on my shoulders. I thought about the freedom of not waiting for a phone call that would never come. I thought about reclaiming my life in my own way. I knew the decision would not be easy. My heart still belonged to her, even if my presence did not. I knew there would be moments of longing, nights filled with memories, and days where silence would echo louder than any word. But I also knew that this choice was necessary for my dignity and peace. I considered speaking to her once more, telling her exactly how I felt. But I knew that words could never carry the truth as powerfully as my actions would. My silence would speak for me. My absence would tell the story she refused to hear. I decided to step away quietly, without confrontation. No shouting, no blame, no resentment shouted into the air. Just a quiet, deliberate turning of the page. I wanted my last gift to her to be a demonstration of respect, even in the face of her disrespect toward me. That night, I wrote nothing. I said nothing. I simply made my choice in the stillness of my own heart. And that choice was to leave, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. The third part of my decision was about legacy. I knew that leaving her house meant leaving behind more than walls and memories. It meant leaving behind a piece of my own life. But I decided that some things were worth keeping for myself, my dignity, my peace, my love. These were not things she could take away, no matter how much she wished to erase my presence. I chose to carry them with me. They would become my legacy to myself. I thought about the day I would walk away. I would not make it a spectacle. I would not allow bitterness to paint the story of my departure. Instead, I would make it an act of quiet strength. I would close the door softly, leaving behind the life I once gave to her without looking back in anger. I knew some would call me weak for not fighting, but I understood that strength was not always in confrontation. Strength could be in silence. Strength could be in letting go with grace. Strength could be in walking away without needing to prove a point. The more I thought about it, the clearer my decision became. I would step away quietly, with dignity intact, carrying nothing but my memories and my resolve. That would be my answer to her betrayal. The fourth part of my decision was about peace. I had lived long enough to know that holding on to anger destroys the soul. I chose peace over conflict. I chose silence over noise. I chose absence over the pain of constant rejection. I knew the world would not stop for my departure. Life would go on, the house would stand, the walls would remember me even if she did not, and I would find peace in knowing that I had answered her cruelty not with cruelty of my own, but with quiet dignity. I thought about my own life beyond her house. There were still roads to walk, mornings to greet, and memories to make for myself. My departure was not an end, but a beginning. The beginning of a life lived quietly, without expectation, without apology, and without regret. I decided to take my time. There was no rush. This was not an act of defiance to be done in haste. This was a choice of a lifetime, and I would take it with care. I would leave on my own terms, not hers. I sat that night and made a promise to myself to never return to the place where my dignity had been questioned, to never beg for a place that was no longer mine, to let my silence become my answer. The fifth part of my decision was about healing. I knew leaving her house would leave wounds, but I also knew it was the first step toward healing. I would not let her choice define the rest of my life. I would not allow bitterness to root itself in my heart. I thought about the years ahead, quiet years, years of rebuilding myself. I would find peace in solitude. I would find strength in absence. I would learn to live with my own company again. The decision became clearer the more I thought about it. I would not linger where I was not wanted. I would not fight for a place that had been taken away. I would walk away with my head held high, carrying my dignity as my prize. I understood now that some battles were not meant to be fought with words, but with actions. My action was leaving. My answer was absence. I looked out into the night, feeling the weight of my choice settle into my bones. I was leaving, not because I was weak, but because I was choosing peace. I decided then that I would make my departure quietly, without anger, without noise, without the need to be seen. My silence would speak louder than any argument. The sixth part of my decision was about truth. I knew she might never understand why I was leaving. She might never see the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the quiet endurance. But I did not need her understanding. I only needed my own truth. The truth was that I could no longer remain where I was not wanted. The truth was that her actions had spoken louder than any words. The truth was that my dignity demanded I walk away. I began to prepare myself for the morning I would leave. I would gather my few belongings with care. I would leave behind nothing but memories and silence. I would close the door softly, without drama. I would not look back, because looking back would mean reopening wounds that I was choosing to heal. My departure would be an act of quiet strength, an answer to betrayal, without bitterness. That night I slept little. My mind was full of memories and the weight of my choice. But in my heart, there was a strange peace. I knew I had made the right decision. The seventh part of my decision was about legacy. I would not leave her house in anger, but with dignity. My legacy was not in walls or money. My legacy was in the quiet love I had given her all my life. My legacy was in the example of strength I would leave behind. I understood that walking away was not the end of our story, but the continuation of my own. My decision was my statement to her, that love can remain even in absence, that dignity can outlive betrayal, and that peace can be found in letting go. That night, I made my final choice. I would leave quietly. I would carry my memories and my silence. I would let my absence speak for me. And in that moment, I knew I had chosen wisely. I had chosen peace. The morning after I made my decision, I felt a quiet resolve inside me. My heart was heavy but clear. I knew that stepping away would be my first act of strength. But I also knew I wanted her to understand, in some way, the cost of what she had done. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choice, not through shouting or blame, but through the quiet power of my actions. I began by thinking of what I could do that would be meaningful without being cruel. I knew she had won her fortune, but she had lost something far greater, the respect she once carried for me. That was something money could never buy back. My plan was not revenge born of anger, but of quiet exposure. I would turn the tables without raising my voice. The first step was to seek advice. I reached out to an old friend who had been a lawyer for years. I told him nothing of my feelings, only of my situation. I wanted to know the truth about my rights. I knew that her decision to remove me from the house might not stand if challenged, but I did not want to challenge her out of spite. I wanted to challenge her in a way that revealed her choices for what they truly were. My friend listened carefully. He told me there were possibilities. I could make a claim, not just for a place in her house, but for recognition of years of sacrifice. He warned me it would be difficult, but possible. He told me it would require patience, proof, and silence. Silence, he said, would be my greatest weapon. That advice became my strategy. I did not rush. I did not announce my plan. I moved quietly, gathering what I needed. I collected evidence of the years I had worked, the sacrifices I had made. I looked through photographs, old letters, and even bills from years ago that showed what I had done without asking for repayment. Each document was a brick in the quiet foundation of my answer to her betrayal. For days, I worked in silence. I did not speak of my plan to anyone, not even to my closest friends. My resolve was private. My actions would speak louder than words. I wanted her to discover my answer in her own way, without me telling her directly. That way, it would be hers to understand or to ignore. I visited my lawyer several times, each visit adding another layer to the case I was building. I did not see this as revenge, but as exposure. I wanted her to see that her actions were not without consequence. I wanted her to know that taking without gratitude leaves its own kind of poverty. As I prepared, I felt a strange calm. The storm inside me was settling into quiet determination. I understood that this was not just about money or property. This was about dignity. This was about telling her, without shouting, that her choices had a cost. I continued living quietly, as if nothing had changed. I kept to my daily routines. I spoke to no one of my plans. But inside me, the plan was growing stronger. I knew the moment to act would come soon. It came 20 minutes after her celebration. That morning, I had been calm, almost serene. She was still caught up in her joy, her laughter filling the air. She had invited friends, neighbors, and her new circle of acquaintances. No one knew what was coming except me. I walked quietly into the house she now claimed as her own. No knock, no announcement. Just the slow, deliberate steps of a man carrying a quiet storm. I approached her with a folder in my hand. No one noticed me at first. The air was filled with laughter and chatter. But when she saw me, her smile faltered. I did not speak. I did not explain. I placed the folder on the table in front of her. The room went silent. She opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she read. There were documents, legal papers, letters, and photographs, all proving years of sacrifice, work, and commitment. I had built my case quietly, and now the proof was there before her. 20 minutes after her laughter, silence filled the room. Her friends looked on in confusion. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some looked shocked. Others stared with quiet understanding. My daughter sat still, staring at the papers. Her hands trembled. I stayed silent. My silence was the loudest thing in the room. I did not speak to explain. I did not argue to justify. I let the weight of those documents speak for me. My years of devotion, her sudden betrayal, and the truth of what had been taken without thought were all there on the table. She looked up at me then, her face pale. There was a moment of stillness, of recognition, of something lost forever. I saw pride falter in her eyes, replaced by something heavy, shame. But I did not give her the satisfaction of hearing me speak my pain. I kept my silence. The crowd around us began to stir, whispering again. Some asked questions quietly. Others looked at me with respect, but I gave them nothing more than a quiet nod. My message was clear without words. I was not there to argue. I was there to show her the cost of her choice. She tried to speak, but her voice was small, uncertain. I stayed still. I did not meet her eyes. My silence was my answer. My silence became the sound of her own conscience speaking to her. That moment became a turning point. I knew she would never understand fully, but she would carry the weight of that silence with her. I wanted her to live with it, to reflect on it quietly, as I had. I stepped away then, leaving the folder where it lay. The room was silent, heavy with meaning. I walked out without a word, carrying nothing but the quiet dignity of my decision. The steps I took away from her house were slow, deliberate. I did not rush. I did not look back. I let each step echo the years of quiet sacrifice that had brought me to this moment. I was not angry. I was not bitter. I was at peace. My heart was still heavy, but my spirit was calm. I had turned the tables without shouting, without breaking my own dignity. I had answered betrayal with quiet strength. I had exposed her choice without humiliation. I had let silence be my voice. That day, I learned something powerful. That revenge does not always need noise. That exposure does not need shouting. That dignity can be louder than victory. I walked away with my head held high, carrying my peace with me. I had given her a lesson without uttering a word, and that silence would speak louder than anything I could say. This was my turning point, my quiet revolution, my answer to betrayal. I learned that sometimes the greatest power lies not in speaking, but in walking away. Not in confrontation, but in quiet presence. Not in noise, but in silence. 20 minutes after she celebrated her win, I showed her the cost of her choice. Not with anger, but with truth. Not with shouting, but with dignity. Not with revenge, but with silence. And in that silence, I found my own victory. The moment I returned to her house, I carried a quiet weight in my steps. I did not rush. I did not knock. I wanted the moment to arrive naturally, without spectacle. The air was still thick with her laughter from earlier, her joy unknowing of what was coming. That silence would soon become heavier than her fortune. I walked in calmly, as if I had nowhere else to be, as if my steps were part of a story already written. The faces of her guests were turned toward her, full of smiles and cheers. They did not notice me enter at first. I moved quietly toward the center of the room, where she stood surrounded by laughter and congratulations. My hand carried the folder, my expression steady, my eyes fixed ahead. I did not speak. I let the moment build. When she noticed me, her smile faltered. Something in my stillness unsettled her. She looked at me and then glanced back at her guests, as if to explain away my presence. I made no move to speak. I placed the folder on the table before her with deliberate care. The sound of it landing echoed softly in the room. A hush fell over everyone present. Conversation died in an instant. All eyes turned toward the folder. Her own hands reached for it before hers could stop themselves. She opened it slowly, with a quiet curiosity that quickly turned to confusion. Her fingers paused over the papers. Her laughter, her pride, her joy from earlier all disappeared like smoke in air. Inside were documents she could not ignore. Photographs of years spent together, receipts for things I had sacrificed, proof of work done quietly for her sake. Letters I had kept from decades past, showing my care. Legal documents confirming my claim, each piece a word in my silent answer to her betrayal. She read without speaking. Her face changed with each page. There was disbelief, then shock, then a quiet understanding that something precious had shifted forever. Around us, whispers began to rise again, low and uncertain. The laughter of earlier now felt like a distant memory. The air had grown heavy with meaning. I stood still. I did not interrupt her thoughts. I did not explain. I let the silence work as my voice. I wanted her to hear the truth in absence, to feel the weight of what had been done to me. I wanted her to understand without me needing to say it aloud. Her friends looked at the papers, then at her, then at me. They whispered among themselves. Some faces carried confusion, others wore quiet sympathy. I did not look at them. My attention stayed fixed on her. My silence was an unspoken message. The truth was now hers to face. Her hands trembled. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with something I could not name. Regret, perhaps. Confusion, perhaps. Pride fading. But I did not offer her an answer. I gave her the gift of silence, letting her find her own truth. The silence lasted longer than a moment. No one moved. No one spoke. My daughter folded her hands over the papers, her eyes not meeting mine. I stepped back quietly, letting her hold the weight of the folder. I walked away without a word. I left her surrounded by whispers, surrounded by the truth she had refused to hear before. My silence followed me out of that room, heavier than any argument could have been. This moment was my reveal, my quiet exposure of years of sacrifice and betrayal. I had not shouted, I had not demanded, I had not begged. I had shown her the truth through stillness, proof, and dignity. Her fortune was loud. My silence was louder. That silence would speak to her long after I had gone. I knew that my quiet act was a lesson she would not forget. I had turned the tables without confrontation. I had given her an answer she could not ignore. That day, I learned something profound. The power of truth lies in calm revelation. Revenge is not always in noise. Sometimes it is in stillness, in proof, in letting absence speak. That day, I taught her without saying a word. I left her house with peace in my heart. I did not look back. I had given my answer. The silence was my final word. 20 minutes after her laughter, I gave her silence. And in that silence lay my victory. The moment I walked away from that house, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Her laughter was gone, replaced by silence that seemed heavier than the night. I did not look back. My steps were quiet, but steady, each one carrying the weight of years of sacrifice and the truth I had given her. Outside, the air was still, as if the world itself had paused to witness the end of something once whole. Inside, I imagined her standing there, holding the folder with trembling hands, surrounded by whispers she could not escape. I knew those whispers would follow her for days, weeks, months. I knew the truth I revealed would not fade. I had changed the story between us forever. That moment had shifted everything. She had won the lottery, yes, but I had won something greater, the clarity that comes from exposing betrayal without losing dignity. Her fortune was vast, but so was the cost of her pride, of her respect, of her love, the cost she would now carry silently, as I had carried my silence. I found myself walking slowly down the street, my coat drawn close against the chill of the evening. People passed by without knowing the storm that had taken place inside that house. To them, it might have been just another day. To me, it was the day I reclaimed my voice in silence. I walked past the familiar shops and the corner cafe where we once laughed together, and the memories clung to me like shadows. My mind wandered to her face when she first saw the documents. The surprise, the confusion, the sudden quiet. That quiet told me she knew she could no longer hide behind her fortune. She had sought to erase me from her life, but I had returned her own choice back to her. That truth was heavier than money. At the same time, I felt a strange calm. I had not fought her in anger. I had not shouted. I had let the facts speak. I had let the silence speak. And in that silence, I had spoken more clearly than any argument could. When I reached my own small home that night, I did not feel victorious in the way one expects. There was no celebration. There was only quiet. I sat in my chair, letting the events settle in my mind. My daughter had changed, but I had changed too. I had learned that revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is a quiet, deliberate act that leaves a deeper mark. The following days brought the fallout I expected. Family members spoke quietly when they thought I would not hear. Friends asked questions with careful concern. Neighbors looked at me differently, as if they had witnessed a shift in who I was. I heard her name spoken softly, and I knew she was telling her version of the story. But her words no longer mattered to me. My truth had been given. The whispers grew louder, and with them, her absence grew heavier in my life. She had chosen her fortune over me. I had chosen my peace over confrontation. That choice shaped both our lives. Weeks passed, and the reality settled in. My daughter no longer called, no longer visited. Her house became a place I would no longer walk into. The distance between us was not bridged by explanations or apologies. It was bridged by silence and the knowledge that something precious had been lost forever. I often thought of the moment I gave her that folder. It was not an act of revenge born from anger. It was an act of dignity, of truth, of quiet justice. I did not need her to understand me fully. I only needed her to face the reality of what she had done. And face it, she did. I knew that in the quiet corners of her life, that moment lived with her. That truth would sit beside her fortune, unspoken but undeniable. That was my final gift to her, the knowledge that silence could speak louder than words. The fallout was not just hers, it was mine as well. I had lost my daughter's presence, but I had regained something else, my peace of mind. I no longer carried the weight of unanswered questions. I had chosen my own dignity over bitterness. And in that choice, I found a kind of freedom. I learned that sometimes the strongest answer to betrayal is not to fight back, but to step away, to leave space for truth to stand on its own. I learned that silence can be the most powerful voice, and that peace can be found in walking away without anger. That day, 20 minutes after she thought she had won everything, I showed her she had lost something far greater. I stepped away quietly that day, without turning back, without a sound, without another word. The house I had once called home was behind me now, filled with echoes of what had been and could never be again. My daughter's laughter, her joy, her pride, even her silence, all remained there. But I left them behind as well. My steps carried me forward, away from betrayal and toward peace. The road ahead was empty, yet it felt full of meaning, of choices, of the knowledge that I had acted with truth and dignity. I carried no anger, only a quiet resolve. My exit was not a defeat, but a declaration. I was no longer part of her life in the way she had chosen. I was part of my own life now. I did not look for applause. I did not need anyone to call me a hero or to acknowledge my pain. My exit was not for them. It was for me. To preserve what dignity remained, to keep my spirit unbroken, to turn away from a chapter that could only end in sorrow. The streets were colder than I remembered, though the sun still shone softly on the pavement. I walked without urgency, letting each step be deliberate, a testament to my choice. My hands rested lightly at my sides, not clenched in anger, but open to life as it now was. I carried no suitcase of grievances. I had shed that weight long before. I thought of her face that day, 20 minutes after she thought she had everything. I imagined her standing at the doorway, stunned, holding the weight of my claim. That moment was hers forever. My exit was mine forever. There was no need to look back. The lesson had been taught. The silence had spoken. There is power in leaving. Not leaving in anger, but leaving with peace. Not breaking something in the act of walking away, but preserving the value of what was once shared. I learned that day that an exit can be a final answer, and sometimes it is the only answer worth giving. I walked through the park that afternoon, the trees swaying gently as if they understood. People passed me by, some greeting with a nod, others unaware of the story I carried with me. I did not explain. There was nothing to explain. My life was mine to walk forward. My dignity was mine to keep. My peace was mine to hold. I thought of the years I had spent building a life for my family, of the nights I worked late and the mornings I woke tired but determined. I thought of every meal shared, every hard-earned penny saved, every sacrifice made without complaint. Those memories stayed with me, soft but unbroken, as I moved away from what had been and toward what was yet to come. Leaving is not forgetting. It is understanding. Understanding that some doors must close for peace to open. I closed that door that day quietly, without noise, without a fight. My exit was not a loss. It was a choice to protect my heart, my soul, and my dignity. The days that followed were quieter. No longer the sound of her voice, no longer the weight of her choice pressing against mine. I settled into my own rhythm, walking my path without distraction. My friends asked if I missed her. I told them nothing, because the truth was deeper than words could carry. I missed what we once had, but I did not miss the betrayal. I realized that my exit was not about leaving her behind. It was about freeing myself from the need for her acceptance, freeing myself from the chains of disappointment, freeing myself to live with my own truth intact. That is what made my exit complete. Sometimes the greatest lesson we can give is to let go, to leave quietly, without resentment, without bitterness, to exit with peace in your heart, knowing you have preserved your own dignity. That is the lesson I left behind, more powerful than any argument, stronger than any revenge. I walked away that day and never returned. I let the past settle behind me and stepped toward a future I would create for myself. My footsteps became my voice. My silence became my statement. I carried peace instead of anger, truth instead of lies, dignity instead of regret. And in that choice, I found freedom. Freedom from bitterness, freedom from the weight of unanswered questions, freedom from the ties that bound me to a life that no longer belonged to me. I stepped into the quiet, and I carried my own peace. That day was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. My exit was my answer. My exit was my revenge. But most of all, my exit was my peace. Now, as an old man, I tell this story quietly, not for applause, not for pity, but for truth. Time has given me the clarity to see the lessons hidden in pain, and the peace to speak without anger. My exit that day was not a defeat. It was a declaration, a statement that dignity matters more than pride, that peace matters more than possession, that silence matters more than noise. I learned that life will not always go as planned, that the people we love can hurt us deeply, sometimes without warning. But it is in those moments that we choose who we are. Do we stay and fight for respect, or do we leave and preserve it? I chose to leave, and in that choice, I found my answer. I reflect now on my daughter and the way she won her fortune. $29 million was enough to change her world. But what she did with it changed my world even more. She chose pride over love. She chose fortune over family. She chose to close her door rather than open her heart. That was her choice, and mine was different. I did not leave in anger. I left in peace. I left without shouting, without pleading, without demands. I left knowing I had preserved my truth. I left knowing she would face her own lesson in time. And I left carrying nothing but my dignity and my peace. There is power in reflection. I spent nights replaying that moment, thinking about what I lost and what I gained. I lost my home, but I gained freedom. I lost her presence, but I gained my own voice. I lost her love, but I preserved my self-respect. That is a balance worth every tear shed. When she kicked me out, I could have fought harder. I could have demanded respect, pleaded for understanding, or clung to what was slipping away. But I realized that no fight would have restored what had already been broken, and so I chose my exit, quiet, dignified, absolute. My reflection now carries no bitterness. The years have softened the pain and sharpened the wisdom. I understand now that my silence and my exit were my greatest acts of strength. I gave her a final gift, the truth without destruction. I gave myself a final gift, peace without regret. That is what I hold on to now. As I walk through the days ahead, I carry that lesson with me. I tell it to anyone who will listen, quietly, with calm and with love. Not as a warning, but as a testament that dignity is more powerful than wealth, that peace is more precious than revenge, and that silence can speak louder than words. I see now that my daughter's choice to push me away was not just about money, it was about her own fears and pride. And my choice to walk away was not just about leaving her, it was about saving myself, saving my dignity, my peace, my heart. That is why I kept my silence. That is why I chose my exit. When I think back to that moment, 20 minutes after she told me to leave, I understand now it was not the end. It was the beginning of a deeper truth. That sometimes the greatest revenge is not to answer with anger, but to answer with peace. To leave quietly and let life speak for itself. Now, in the quiet of my old age, I tell this story not to reopen wounds, but to close them. I tell it to remind myself that my choice was right, that my exit was the answer, that dignity was worth more than any fortune, that peace was worth more than any victory. My final thought, after all these years, is this: she kicked me out for her fortune. 20 minutes later, I held her lesson in my hands. It is a lesson I carry quietly, deeply, and without regret. And it is a lesson I leave for anyone who listens,